fresh, but we could use BSD North pretty much everywhere in that report.
Right. I just spent the time. Anyway. Ready?
Let's go.
And recording.
BSD Now, episode 198, BSD North, or You Can't Handle the Lip Truth, recorded on the 14th of June 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're both back from BSD Can last week. We're pretty excited that we're back and also had a great time there. Met a lot of folks, had a good meeting with people and listeners and all around a good time. This is pretty much the episode where we tell you all the great things that happened last week.
Yeah, we're going to try to, unload everything that happened at BSD Can, partly so that we don't forget it, but mostly for the benefit of people who weren't there, or even, when people were there, you can't possibly have done everything or been in all of the things at the same time. So just sharing between people that were there has a lot of value. So we decided to try to share as much as we could.
Yeah, and even Alan and I were sometimes in the same room, but also in different ones. So there's still only a fraction of all the stuff that's been going on. That's what we could find as links and stuff people have already posted and our personal recollection of the events. So let's get right into this. So as our first headline is because I had a foundation board meeting on Tuesday, which is our annually board meeting of the whole FreeBSD Foundation board. I might as well put on my FreeBSD Foundation hat. So this is pretty much a full day event where we meet in the morning and we have an agenda, of course, with the whole board or most of the board that was there. We only had Robert Watson in a box there again as video conference, at least for the morning session, and Ann Dickinson, who couldn't make it this year for other reasons. We had her as well connected via video conference, which also went well. So what we did there is pretty much discuss what we will going to do in the foundation for next year and also the year to come. This is pretty much a planning meeting. Sometimes it's a little bit boring for outsiders, but for us it's good to be in one room with everyone to make some advanced things going on that might not be so easy over email. You know how these things work. And the first thing, the usually agenda item is the voting for the new board members, the president, the vice president, the secretary and treasurer. And this year, Justin Gibbs, who's been a long-time FreeBSD Foundation president, told us he would step down from his duties this year because he has house renovations going on. And that way he requested that he is not president for next year or for the year to now until next May or June, depending on when we have our board meeting then. So that was pretty much an open position. And that discussion kind of went in the wrong direction first when people suggested that the vice president should step up, which was a direction I didn't like. And I heard a lot of people laugh about that remark. But pretty much everyone agreed a person in the United States should take up the president because that role sometimes needs to sign documents, and there's also time zone issues for stuff that needs to be decided relatively quickly. So fortunately, George Neville-Neal took up that task to serve as president this year. And of course, there's a vote going on or has been going on, and we all agreed that he would do a fine job. And Justin Gibbs, since George Neville-Neal was the secretary until now, stepped down, and Justin Gibbs took over that position. So we have George Neville-Neal as president now. I'm still the vice president. Woo! Treasurer is Kirk McCusick, and Justin Gibbs will be secretary. And that's pretty much the more formalities that we have to do for the foundation to function. And then we pretty much went over the agenda items. We have a couple of new folks at the foundation as well. So we had the luxury or the luck to have Scott Lamont with us. So Scott is relatively new. I think he's joined last month or so, or the middle of last month. So Scott will be a staff member and will join the foundation, or has joined the foundation team as senior program manager with the focus on managing and evangelizing the programs for advanced technologies in FreeBSD, including preparing project plans, coordinating resources, and facilitating interactions between commercial vendors like Intel or others that have a closer partnership or want to have a closer relationship with the foundation. And that is specific position makes the bridge between the foundation and those companies a little bit easier. So that's new. He joined pretty much our board meeting there and was new, of course, but that's a good way of getting to know everyone. And he was also at the conference. And he's a very smart guy and very friendly and helpful. I guess people met him there at the foundation booth as well. And we pretty much made sure that he knew everyone and made introductions at the conference so that he knows his way around the community. But I guess it still is pretty much a big new thing. It's the same for everyone who's been to a conference, but we made sure that he's not too overwhelmed. And
I met him at dinner at the GoBuff.
Oh yeah, he was there. That was good. So we have something brooding there in the partnership programs and our connections to other companies that will not only help the foundation secure funding from these companies, but also the companies have a way to channel their ideas, their wishes, their new developments they want to see in the community through us, and we can decide and prioritize what's important for everyone, and will help the community and the companies move forward. We also made a big list of upcoming conferences that we want to be at, not only as foundation representatives, but also not only sponsors, but also giving talks and do workshops and things like that. So these aren't only BSD conferences necessarily, but also conferences that are tech focused, operating system focused in general, things where we make an impact of presenting FreeBSD and get the word out about what it is all about. We also have interns, so that is something we are trying out this year for the first time. So there's a university in Waterloo in Canada, which has a co-op student program. So students can team up with a company or a foundation in this case to do internships, and we have 2 of them at the moment. Siva and Charlie. Was it Shiva or Siva? I think it's Siva. Sorry if I mispronounced that. So both were there. We made it happen that they could attend the conference, which is nice. And they were pretty much under the mentorship of Ed Maas. They rented a little office in Canada, so they have a little office there pretty much to work and do their projects there. And one of the students had his project brought with him, which is a nice Tinderbox dashboard. We put that out at the foundation table, so a lot of people saw that, I guess. So this is pretty much a BeagleBone Black displaying the current status of the Tinderbox run and the the Jenkins output. So we can see red light if something's broken and green lights if the build went well. And this is pretty much done with all embedded components, and which is nice. So we have a little picture frame where this display is being embedded in, and you can pretty much see the build status like on your desk, or if you just want to have a quick glance on it. That's pretty nice, and you find the detailed instructions how that was built and what kind of source changes you need and everything to build one of your own in our FreeBSD Foundation blog post that we put up there. And the co-ops are still going on, so we might see some more updates in that regard, and which is exciting. So this is something we are also doing as part of outreach and teaching students about what FreeBSD is in development terms, and maybe they will join later on as developers, which is our hope, and do good work in that regard. So that's a different way of bringing people into the project and community, and I guess they had a very good time at the conference themselves. They shot a lot of pictures. They helped out at the foundation booth, which was appreciated, and talked to a lot of people about what's cool about BSDs in general.
Yeah, I get to meet them at the newbie orientation session, which I guess we'll talk about in a minute.
Oh yeah, yeah, they were there.
Interesting to talk to them about what they're working on, and the Tinderbox project started as just a web page to be able to see this stuff, and then suddenly it was a physical thing that they built out of the Raspberry Pi running FreeBSD, BeagleBone Black. I thought that's really cool.
Mm. Yeah, it's like a little magic mirror where you could like put up weather and greetings of the day or a quote of the day, and that you can pretty much display everything if you have the basic components there. And it's all done with FreeBSD, and that's a nice section of development work. We're seeing that this is actually quite easy to do with a couple of components. Next up, so in parallel, this was a little bit coordinated depending on how far we got with the board meeting. The foundation put out a call for project proposal solicitation for 2017. So this is a proposal for work relating to any of the major subsystems in FreeBSD or infrastructure, and people can propose projects they or other people can do, and we fund these projects if they are accepted, and focus on really getting some of these components that might have been a little bit neglected or have a more focus in the community, and we find no one currently to do them, then you could get foundation funding for that to get this moving ahead.
Yeah, so if you have an idea on something you would like to do in FreeBSD and it would help the whole community, then you can propose the project to the FreeBSD Foundation and they might decide to fund it. The deadline is July 14th, and they will announce the accepted projects in August.
Mm-hmm. That might be something we'll cover in August and see what projects made the run.
They also put out a list of things in particular that they are looking for, including improving the security of FreeBSD and the applications running on it, the testing and test infrastructure and quality assurance improvements, tools to support development, collaboration, and communication within the community, improving the FreeBSD out-of-the-box experience for new users with a variety of hardware platforms, and establishing FreeBSD as a leader in advancing projects of shared interest like ZFS, LLVM, LibArchive, things of that nature.
Yeah.
I have all the details here and the form to fill out if you have an idea.
Mm-hmm. This is pretty much what we do with the donations people do as well. We put the money forth into the project to get certain areas developed. And we saw this already in previous years, what kind of subsystems were developed. And this is a good way of not only developing stuff for the foundation, which you normally wouldn't have time for, or you need the specific time and still getting paid for it to develop those. So we'll review that in August, I guess, when the decision has been made.
In general, it's specifically after the type of stuff that isn't of interest to a lot of the vendors in particular. There's not something that somebody would normally work on for their day job, but something that FreeBSD needs, and to kind of fill that gap of not the general stuff or performance enhancements and so on that lots of the other people in the community are already working on, but the type of stuff that doesn't get worked on voluntarily.
Yep. Other than that, we also put out a couple of deadlines for travel grants for some of the upcoming conferences. And one just expired for BSD Cambridge. Was that extended maybe? I don't think so. So that's pretty much coming up in August, the 2nd of August. Yeah, 2nd of August until the 4th. And we need a couple of weeks before that to, get the grant money flowing into the right hands for the people who signed up for a travel grant.
If you want to go to VBSDCon and need assistance, you need to apply by July 20th. Mm-hmm. And if you want to go to EuroBSDCon, you need to apply by August 2nd.
Yeah, those are the dates. And it's pretty much filling out the provided Google form, providing a reason why you want to go and why you need the travel grant, and some dates that we know when you're going to travel and things like that.
Why it would be useful to the project to have you there, that type of thing.
Yep. And that's pretty much how we support the project as well, because some people are like, I would go to that conference, but I'm a little short on money there, or the hotels are expensive, or the flights, and we might put you there with the right amount of money. And if you agree to write a little blog post afterwards for our blog and a trip report detailing how it went, then we're all happy that you did go. And if there's something coming out of it, like a new development project or new code that you wrote at the conference or afterwards, then everyone benefits from that. So don't be shy of filling out those travel grant forms. That pretty much, well, we discussed way more than I could cover in this section about the foundation board meeting. And some of the things are still ongoing, and we will reveal them in a little bit later, so I'm not spoiling everything. But it was a good session, and I guess we made a lot of progress on some of the things we discussed from the earlier years and also what's currently on our table. With that, I take off my hat again, and we move to the goat BOF.
Yes. So this is a tradition that's been going on at BSDCamp for a while, of just the night before the developer summit, which is the 2 days before the proper conference. Everybody meets up at the pub nearest the university and just hangs out. But a couple of years ago, it resulted in the creation of Groff, the BSD Goat. And from that point on, it's been renamed the Goat BOF, where everybody comes to see Groff rather than anything else. And so you can see here Groff proudly displayed from the ceiling of the Royal Oak.
Yeah, I discovered that only when I left the Oak, so I was like, whoa, where's the goat? Oh, up there.
Yep. And we got lots of pictures that were taken there.
Yeah, usually everyone wants to get a shot with the goat together.
Mm-hmm. Lots of people.
And it's a good way of, getting back to everyone where everyone is, everyone arrives, and it's a good way of starting the conference in a nice and friendly atmosphere.
Yes, and then Michael Dexter showed up in camouflage instead of his usual tweed.
I didn't really knew what he was, because he was sitting across me, and it was like, I knew this guy, but where? Which conference was? Oh, it's Dexter. Ah.
It took me a minute to catch on who it was as well.
Yeah, he pretty much blended in as a Canadian.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't stay long for the goat BOF. Yeah.
Yeah, there was lots of people meeting up and hanging out. It was a good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always a nice event, and I think this is going to become a tradition now, or already has.
Yep.
So that evening, if I had not enough meeting until now, then I had already. So in that evening, in the board meeting, since a couple of years now, we have the FreeBSD Journal editorial board meeting. So this is pretty much the editorial board meeting at one of the conference rooms in one of the nearby hotels, sitting there and discussing the upcoming issues for the FreeBSD Journal. And that's also a way of, planning ahead what kind of new issues we're going to put out, or what articles we want to write, or what kind of people could write those articles. And we pretty much covered everything, or at least planned up ahead until the beginning of 2019. So there's an editorial calendar we need to fill out, and we know that in, let's say, 2 or 3 months, this and that specific issue will come out, and a new topic is presented there, and we try to see when a new major release of FreeBSD coming out, which we want to cover in a special issue. So we planned a little bit ahead for FreeBSD 12, which might be a little bit far ahead, but still something we want to focus on. And then also discussed what other things we could do for the journal as well, like new sections, like we could do a regular column about certain topics, which would post some editors to become regular writers if people like those. And we also want to make the journal a little bit more user-friendly, because we got some feedback that people like the content. It's very technical and very deep dive into specific topics, but it's also, if you give it to a beginner, they are like, it's good, but it's very technical and goes very deep, and I don't understand that much now. So we want to have some introductory articles, some how-tos and tutorials. So this might be something we will do in the future. And it's also a good way of, looking back at previous issues and how they were received, and it's a good session. So we're identifying some people who write articles, and I might chase some people down or write one in the future. I agreed to write one about monitoring and on the upcoming monitoring issue with Lars Engels, because he's the maintainer of the Isinga, or however you pronounce that, the monitoring system. And that's something I'm going to write with him.
Cool. When do we get to see the calendar for 2018?
So usually, do we put them out somewhere on the
So the
website
calendar for
somewhere?
2017 is up on the journal site, but I guess, we're not very close to 2018 yet, so
Okay. Tell you what, I'll make that happen, and it's going to appear on the foundation website with an update, and we'll cover it in a future show
cool.
because that's everyone's interest. And if you've never seen the journal, we also have a couple of free articles there. Go to freebsdfoundation.org/journal, and there you can find desktop editions as well as device-specific editions for Androids and iOS devices.
Yeah,
But
there's
that day,
a number of free
yeah,
ones there to look at to kind of get an idea of the quality of the articles you get when you buy the subscription.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, it's actually quite easy to write an article for the journal because you get a lot of help, editorial help, and you pretty much don't have to worry about, if you have grammar problems or typos. That's all being taken care of afterwards. You can focus on the content and the writing, and everyone else will around that will to make sure that it's going to look nice afterwards, like nice pictures with desktop publishing. That's all being done by the people behind the article or the journal. So that's pretty much out of your way, and you can focus on the actual content. But that day of meetings was over then on Tuesday, and I mean, people might find this boring, but it's also part of the foundation work that we are doing to coordinate and get the word out, and also find new activities we could do to spread the word about FreeBSD and other open source projects.
Yep.
Okay, next day, the Dev Summit began.
Yeah, so all that was just on Tuesday. The conference doesn't technically start until Wednesday.
Yeah, we're just getting started.
Yep. So Wednesday is the first day of the FreeBSD Developer Summit, which is an important part of the FreeBSD calendar where a lot of the developers are all together in one room and we can actually talk about things and get some work done. So we started with an opening session. The Dev Summit was run by Gordon Tetlow this year because our usual victim, John Baldwin, wasn't around to do it. He had family obligations. But Gordon did a very good job, and we thank him immensely for taking on that task, because otherwise Benedict would have had to do it.
Yeah, I mean, everyone is like, oh, the vice president is the usual next choice, and I ran away from that. Well, I offered help, and he recognized that, but Gordon pretty much had everything under control. He had a lot of help from Mr. Baldwin in the background because he knew what kind of stuff is up to be done in the foundation or in the Dev Summit, and that helped him to get through the whole organizing part. But pretty much Gordon is a good organizer and ran the whole Dev Summit very well. So thanks for that.
Yep. And then Benno Rice opened up the first session with a presentation about the work in progress on the Code of Conduct, which is mostly finished, the new updated one, and should be sent out quite soon. That was followed by a round of Q&A about that, with generally positive feedback about that and some questions and so on. After that, I joined Benno and we talked about the FreeBSD Community Proposal project. This is a process that we developed kind of based a little bit on the Internet Engineering Task Force RFCs, the Joyent's request for discussions, and the Python PEP or Python improvement process or something? Enhancement process?
Yeah, enhancement, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, it's a type of document you generate to describe the idea of the change you want to make, whether it's to code or the processes or whatever. And generally, the idea is to try to focus some of the discussions we have when we're trying to change something, rather than just having endless arguments on the mailing list. We're going to, in concrete, written down terms, come up with the pros and cons of the idea, and eventually come to a decision, rather than having this kind of decision paralysis as we just continually argue it forever. So that even if an idea ends up not being accepted, we've kind of documented why, so that when someone asks about it a couple of weeks later or months later or whatever, we can be like, well, the reason we didn't do that is documented clearly over here in this document that we've generated. But in general, the idea is to make sure we've actually collected and documented the feedback about the idea, and that the ideas we go ahead with are thought out and written down properly before they happen, because that tends to make it go much smoother.
Yep. And then,
So
yeah.
we have the very first proposal is FCP number 0, which is the guidelines on how the process actually works. But there's also a template for you to write your own, and all the information you need. And we're going to start seeing this process be used very soon.
Yeah, we're excited about that, and many people already behind the scenes were like, I'm writing an FCP for that and for this, and I guess this is going to work out well, and hopefully we can make some progress on some of the ongoing discussions we've been having for a couple of years, and put this in the right direction.
Yep.
So that went over the until lunchtime. And
no,
after
so after our break, we
right.
had an update from Intel.
Right, that was before lunch.
Can you talk about that one? I had to step out and take a business call for that.
That one was a presentation. Is it on the wiki already? I hope so. So that's a presentation from Intel about their new QAT.
Which is a Quick Assist. It's a crypto offload onto a card.
Yeah, exactly. And that's finding some support in FreeBSD, or the talk was about how to integrate those components into FreeBSD and making sure that there's a good support in Intel or in FreeBSD as well, and providing documentation for it and code samples so people know what it's all about and how they can use that in their own projects. Surprisingly, there was little questions, actually none to that one. But I hope we will get the slides later on so we can maybe cover this in the future. And in general, it's good that Intel gave a talk there to put forward some of their technologies. And I think we had this last year also with their non-volatile memory, I guess, if I'm not mistaken. I can look that up. And that pretty much shows us that we are having a good partnership with Intel, and they want to see stuff happening in FreeBSD that benefits them and their downstream customers, and that is a good way of collaborating with an open source community in that regard.
Then after lunch, we broke up into working groups. There was one about Bare SSL, which is an embedded focused alternative to OpenSSL. There was a ZFS working group, which I went to, and a transport working group about networking and TCP/IP and so on.
Yep. So we both attended the OpenZFS working group. Well, you pretty much would have guessed that already. And it was very good. Matt Ahrens ran that one, and also we had a good number of people attending that one, including George Wilson, who was also at the conference. And he pretty much chimed in at specific things where he had stuff written for OpenZFS in specific areas.
Yeah, so Matt led the group, and we talked about features that have recently been committed, pull requests that are coming in, stuff that's out for review, and stuff that's coming up down the road. So features that have come into FreeBSD recently include the compressed ARC, which allows you to keep blocks in memory already compressed. In OpenZFS, although I'm not sure if it's in FreeBSD yet, is compress send receive. So when you're doing replication, if the blocks are compressed, they stay compressed as they go over the send stream instead of having to be decompressed and then recompressed on the other side, which helps a lot. Under recently upstreamed in OpenZFS, Matt talked at length about his recent commit to improve RAID-Z write speeds. So it turns out what happens if you use large block sizes with large sector sizes on your hard drive, RAID-Z has padding, right? So all allocations are divisible by n plus 1, where n is your level of redundancy, like RAID-Z 2. So in RAID-Z 2, all allocations have to be divisible by 3 blocks, because that's the smallest allocation you can have in a RAID-Z 2, and you don't want to leave a single or 2 blocks of space that you could never use, because you wouldn't be able to write 1 block in the 2 parity blocks. Although, so an optimization in ZFS said that, you know, for the padding, we don't actually need to write zeros to the disk. We want to do less work, so we'll just skip writing those sectors. And there's an aggregation thing that figures out when you have a bunch of blocks near each other and combines them all together. But when you use a large block size, you're bigger than the limit of that aggregation. So it means that when you're writing a bunch of these large blocks to disks, you'll tell the hard drive, write a bunch of blocks, skip 2 or 3 blocks, then write a bunch of blocks, and then skip a couple blocks. And it turns out with regular spinning hard drives, this is a lot slower than if you actually did write out those 2 extra blocks with zeros. So they've changed the code around a little bit and declare those padding sectors as optional writes. And if they're optional, they always get aggregated. So if you're writing a 1 megabyte block, 2 empty sectors, and a second 1 megabyte block and 2 empty sectors, you won't skip the ones in the middle, causing the hard drive to have to do more work. You'll upgrade them to just writing out the zeros and write the whole block, and it will be much faster. We covered this one in more detail recently when we covered the pull request when it went out on GitHub. You can see all the graphs and stuff. So if you go back a couple of weeks, you'll see more information about that one. The other one that's come up in OpenZFS but isn't in FreeBSD yet is ABD, which is the ARC buffer data. So this is a way to use scatter-gather lists for memory. So instead of having to allocate large contiguous blocks of memory all the time for ZFS, it allows you to do this in regular 4K page sizes. And so instead of needing to find a giant contiguous area of free space, it will use a bunch of smaller ones and build it together into this bigger block. Your main advantage here is that especially if on your pool you're mixing a bunch of different block sizes, this can cause quite a bit of memory fragmentation because you have one region where you're trying to optimize for 16K blocks, and then another one where you're doing 128K blocks, and you can end up wasting a bunch of space. Well, not wasting, having a lot of memory fragmentation and having performance issues there. So ADB lets you do this in all small chunks and just link a list of them together to make a big enough chunk. It's not that important on FreeBSD because the way our memory allocator in the kernel works is better at handling this type of issue. But on Linux, it was a really big deal. So that one will come into FreeBSD at some point, although it might be optional, since it might actually not be that useful on FreeBSD specifically. Then in the stuff that's in progress, and we're hoping to see land relatively soon, they talked about the native encryption work and what's needed for that. And we talked a little bit about what FreeBSD needs to do to be able to support that. Matt talked a bit about channel programs. He didn't go to that one in too much detail because later in the week he gave a full 1 hour talk about channel programs at the Proper conference. They talked a bit about device removal. That feature is mostly done. It's just only ever been reviewed by people that work for Matt, and he would like to have some outside reviewers. But this allows you to remove a stripe or a mirror from a pool. It basically finds the data that's on the disk, moves it to a different disk, and creates a mapping. And so the virtual device is still there, but allows you to actually remove the hard drive and shrink the size of a pool.
Oh yeah, a lot of people were looking for that one.
Yep. They talked a bit about a redacted send and receive. This is a way to make a special kind of a clone of a database or similar data set where you overwrite certain information with zeros. So in the example, if you have a big database of customers and you want to back that up, but you don't want the certain sensitive data to get backed up to, say, the cloud, right? So you clone your database, then you go through your database and overwrite everybody's credit card numbers with zeros or fake numbers or something. It allows you to back up all your customer data and all the records, but redact out the credit card numbers.
Yeah, or the passwords.
Yeah, or whatever you don't want to send. And then you can do incremental sends using this masking technique to just say, don't send this set of data, just send everything else.
Mm-hmm. Another new thing for me was the D-RAID, which I didn't know about before.
I'll get to that one in a second.
Getting ahead of myself.
Talking about the new trim support in ZFS. So currently, only FreeBSD supports trim for ZFS. And this is a new ZFS-specific way to do it, and it's a little bit better than the way FreeBSD does it, so we're looking forward to getting that in all versions of ZFS. Then there's the faster scrub and resilver work, which is very interesting. Basically, instead of walking through the drive and doing the work in almost the random order that it does now, based on the order the data was written and so on, it aggregates what it wants to do in memory. So you get a chunk of memory, a couple hundred megabytes, like 600 megabytes or something, and you start building the list of the blocks you want to actually scrub or resilver. And then once you have walked all the metadata and made this big list of the work you actually want to do on the drive, when that 600 megabytes gets full, you find the biggest contiguous block of work and go and do it, freeing up more space in memory to continue putting together all these random bits. And if you keep doing this, you're going to get nice big chunks of work, not have all these little holes in them, and you'll get a lot less random I/O, and it can speed up the resilver speed of a regular spinning hard drive between 4 and 16 times faster.
Which is, wow. Yeah, that's incredible.
Reducing some of the randomness by sorting the operations on a very large scale before you do it. Then we talked about D-RAID, or distributed parity RAID. We spent quite a bit of time on this, including Matt drawing a bunch of diagrams on the chalkboard. The idea here is, instead of, in a very large cluster computer, like the one that Intel is building for the government in the US, that is going to have 100 hard drives in a node, instead of doing that as a bunch of RAID-Z VDEVs, you create this D-RAID VDEV, and inside of it, it has something akin to these separate VDEVs, but they're kind of mixed up randomly. So when you write one set of blocks, it'll use one set of disks, and the next set will use a different one. And the other thing it has is a virtual spare. So there's a bunch of space not used on every drive, and random spots on those drives. And then when a drive fails, instead of waiting for a replacement, it can resilver to that distributed spare. So, if you have 100 drives that are each a terabyte, each drive has 1/100th of a terabyte of free space kept to do this virtual spare. So when a disk fails, because you've basically had your 100 virtual disks made up by spreading them around randomly across these other 100 disks, it means that when you go to resilver, you're reading from all 100 disks and writing to all 100 disks, except for 99 and 99, because one of the drives has failed. So with a regular RAID-Z setup, where if you had done 10 sets of 10 disks, if one disk fails, you would be reading from 9 disks and writing to one disk once you replaced it. But with D-RAID, you'd be reading from 99 disks and writing to 99 disks. So you're maximizing the IOPS you have available to try to get back to a safe state as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is also a cool idea that he has. And
this one was created by somebody else at Intel.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Supercomputer. Yep. If you want to know more about it, there's if you go to openzfs.org, there's a presentation from the 2015 or 2016 Developer Summit where they walk through it a little bit. One of the other interesting things is there'll be stripes in the middle of this D-RAID that are set up as a mirror instead of as a RAID. And that's where certain metadata and other important data is stored many, many times, rather than just with the certain level of parity. That work also led to VDEV metadata classes. in particular for this workload that they're going to have, the Intel supercomputer is going to use 16 megabyte blocks on the spinning hard drives in ZFS. So the metadata, which is mostly made up of 4K blocks, they would like to keep on a separate disk so that they don't fragment the space by trying to write, 16 megabytes of data, then 4K or 4K, and then 60 more megabytes. So they've made this way that you can add in a new SSD or other device to your pool, but say, hey, this device is only to store metadata. And it'll write only those type of blocks to that disk. If it gets full, it'll go back to writing it to the other disk. But the general idea is this way you can, optimize different devices for different types of workloads.
Cool. Yeah, I remember. That was discussed.
Yep. Again, more information about most of these items can be found in the OpenZFS Dev Summit wiki, where there are links to the videos from the talks over the last 2 years about these features. Another interesting one is the multi-mount protection, or safe import. This is for the idea where you have a shelf full of disks and you have 2 controllers for it. One of them, the primary, imports the pool and does the work, but you have to be very careful that the secondary doesn't ever mount the pool while the primary has it mounted. So this is some mechanism where when you try to import the pool, it will not touch the disk and just read it every couple of seconds for, say, 5 or 10 seconds and watch and see if the primary, or the other node, has touched the pool. And if it has, it'll say, sorry, no, that pool's still live somewhere else. So that you can prevent the badness that can happen if you fail over. If your secondary thinks it should fail over, but the primary is actually still up, and then you end up with both of them trying to write to your file system at the same time.
Which is bad, yeah.
Yeah. Then they have the zpool checkpoint feature. This is one that was developed at Delphix. We covered it on the show a couple weeks ago. The idea is that during the upgrade process of their appliance, they take a checkpoint first, and then they do a bunch of operations like rename this data set, delete that data set, create this new one, and so on. And if the upgrade fails, they want to undo all of that and go back to what the pool looked like before. Taking snapshots and rolling back works for dealing with overwriting files and so on, but that doesn't work for undeleting a data set or uncreating a data set. So the zpool checkpoint is a really interesting feature.
Yep.
Then
that's cool.
A couple other items that were on the list that are a little further out still, where there's some import improvements that were talked about a bit last year. This is being more resistant to broken pools and giving you more options and more information when a pool won't import about why. And then a bit of code to actually allow you to import a pool even if a device is missing. So if you're missing one drive in a RAID Z, you can still import. But if you have like a RAID 10, right, 2 sets of mirrors, and one entire set is missing, currently it's not possible to import the pool. This work would allow you to do that. Now, you still obviously can't access the data that's on the disks that aren't there. But in the case where you, say, accidentally add a device to the end of your pool that you didn't mean to, and then you remove it, but you don't do it properly and then not realize that you can't ever import your pool again, this will allow you to mount it and read data. You still won't be able to get from the missing device, but if that device was only connected for a few minutes, that's not a lot of data, and all the rest of your files are still there. Whereas currently, if a device is added and you don't have access to it, you can never mount the pool. They also have some work on the improved space allocator, so improving the performance of writing data out, including a VDEV spacemap log. So we can write to it in a log format instead of having to update it atomically quite the same way. Some ZIL performance improvements, so that especially when you're writing to really fast devices like NVMe and so on, that you can get the best performance that the device can offer rather than being locked by ZFS. In particular, because of the way the ZIL works, you're always waiting for the previous allocation to finish before you can do the next one. And this one would allow you to have the other work below finish. It wouldn't report that it was finished until it was done, because things have to be returned in order, but it would allow more of the work to happen at once, which would be good. And then there's the persistent L2 arc, which is, across a reboot, it'll reload the data in the L2 arc, reloading the pointers from the arc to the L2 arc instead of losing those, so that, the stuff you cache to your SSD across the reboot will still be useful.
Yeah. And it depends on whether the persistent L2 arc will be something that's developed differently. If the non-volatile memory storage might be coming out sooner, then you pretty much have that. If you have such a device and put the L2 arc there, then you have a cheap version of that.
Well, most of the NVDIMMs are still treated as separate storage rather than RAM.
Right. But it still will have the contents of after the reboot.
Right. Well, most L2 arcs are SSDs or NVMEs today, and the data is still on the device, but ZFS just ignores it because in order for it to know that it's on the device, there has to be a pointer in the arc in RAM saying this data block is actually over here on the SSD or whatever.
Yeah, the references are missing.
Yeah, and you don't want to block booting while you reload those references. So in the end, the persistent L2 arc will not help your machine boot faster, but as it's running in the background, starting at boot, reloading the stuff from your L2 arc, it will definitely give you back a lot of the performance you expect from your L2 arc a lot sooner.
Yeah, the cache heats up, and yeah, that's cool.
And then the last item that was discussed was Z standard compression in ZFS, which is the one that I'm working on.
And we'll probably have that in FreeBSD as part of the OpenZFS project first, and then if that works properly, then it will distribute to the other downstream consumers of OpenZFS. So we were probably the ones doing the work in that.
Yeah, so the plan for that one is I'm going to finish the Z standard compression work, commit it to FreeBSD. Once it's proven stable in FreeBSD, it will be upstreamed to OpenZFS.
Mm-hmm. That's very cool. I look forward to that. And then we had a break because that session went 3 hours, and after 1.5 hours, Matt was pretty, after speaking and explaining all these features to us, we had a break. And then we pretty much gathered some other ideas from the audience, what kind of new things we could do in ZFS. I asked a little bit about ZFS training materials and documentation for newbies that might still need to learn about ZFS, and ways to collect those and give them out at a central position or a central repository where it's easy to point to and people to find it. And other ideas. We didn't record those sessions, but we pretty much covered everything in that session. And I guess we have a couple of write-ups from the other working groups in that week or on that day. They might be on the FreeBSD wiki already. People are still recovering from the travel, and they'll put up notes in the wiki as they recover. So might cover some of these in a future episode. So that was day 1 of the Dev Summit. Day 2, so the first 2 days of the Dev Summit are the same days that are the days for the BSDCAN tutorial. So there's a bit of overlap, which is why on day 2, we usually have the FreeBSD 12 Have Need 1 session. And that's usually run by George Neville-Neal, but he was teaching his dtrace tutorial, and hence he couldn't make it. So Ed Mast filled in for that, and Gordon also helped out in that session to write stuff down on the chalkboard. Mm-hmm. And that had pretty much a number of features that various people have put forward and are in the process of building. We discussed those, and with an eye towards an upstreaming, and also whether they are feasible to be put into FreeBSD 12, or there's actually a time frame for that. So FreeBSD 12 at the current planning process, which is still relatively rough, is going to be in early 2019. And as we move forward with the development process in head and cutting certain parts of the release off at a certain point, we will cover those. But this session was pretty much what kind of things we want in that release, what kind of stuff people already have, and also some of the needs were identified and to find people that could implement those or help with them.
Yeah, part of this it's kind of part of the vendor summit. The idea is that vendors tell us about features they have, and we decide whether we would want that upstream, and most of the time it's yes. And then we kind of discuss, here's something that I want. Does anybody else want it? Maybe these two vendors and the foundation can collaborate to build this feature. And what do we need? What are things that we really, because of other reasons, we've really ended up needing for 12? Like, we've removed the GNU debugger from base. So that means by time 12 comes around, we're going to need a kernel debugger in base. So, KLODB or whatever.
Things like that, yeah. And it's also good to, we put down the list not just for us and to forget about it, but we take pictures afterwards and put it on the wiki to see the progress going on and see whether some icons have been fixed in future conferences or dev summits, where we will put them out again and see, this has been fixed in the meantime, or this is not an issue anymore, or the issue is still ongoing and we need to work on this much more. So we have those done from previous BSDCans, and we always compare the notes and see what's still left to do. And that's why this session is so important. And after the break, there was the vendor summit, as Alan already mentioned, that ties into the Have Need Want session. But this one gives vendors a better way or a better outreach way to connect with the community and telling what they need in their downstream versions of FreeBSD, what they're using, and also what they can offer to bring into the project that's not under an NDA or that's not too critical that should be kept secret and is better also served into the FreeBSD project, since that can be maintained in there.
Yeah, there's a lot of work that happens at vendors that they're perfectly happy to upstream, and it turns out, hey, that's useful to two other people, so let's get it in there. So a lot of collaboration between the vendors to make everybody's life easier and to make FreeBSD a better project for everybody, but also to make it work better for those vendors so that they'll keep working on FreeBSD and keep employing people full-time to write code for FreeBSD.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that pretty much went on the other days and in lunchtime, because those discussions pretty much identify who are the persons in the audience that want that and who are the people who could implement that. And there was pretty much a lot of one-to-one or multiple people in a corner talking about future developments in that area. So that might be something we will cover in the future and see, this feature has been developed already, or there's progress going on, and this is a good way of seeing that there's a good release of FreeBSD 12 coming out in the far future still. Then we had, after lunch, we broke up again into working groups. There is a testing and continuous integration working group, a containers working group, and a hardening UFS and Geli improvements group. Which one were you at, Alan?
I ran the Geli improvement working group.
Oh, right. You're also the leader. Ha! Well, I was not going to any of those sessions. I helped Dan Langell pack, or I intended to pack the conference bags, but by the time I went there was also already a couple of people staffing the room and helping out, and by the time I was in there, they pretty much had sorted everything out, and we put everything into the car to get it to the Red Lion, where we had the sign up this year.
Yep.
But you were at the session for Geli.
On a working group to come up with a new format for the Geli metadata. The main point of this was to fix some outstanding bugs in Geli that had to do with, in Geli there are two key slots. The idea being that in addition to your key to decrypt the drive, maybe for your employer has the security officer there has a recovery key, the second key in there, so that if something happens to you or if you forget your password, they can still decrypt the drive. However, there's only one field in the metadata to store the number of iterations of the PKCS5v2 key derivation function. And so that you can end up in situations where that number isn't the right. If you set a second key, it can overwrite it, and then the first key won't work anymore, and problems like that. The problem is the metadata is 512 bytes, the last sector of the drive, and it's currently using 511 of those bytes, meaning there wasn't room anywhere to store additional iteration numbers or an additional flag that I wanted to be able to say, hey, this one requires a key file to decrypt and so on. So after discussing it with people and kind of presenting my original idea, we worked on and came up with a much better idea. So the new format will allow arbitrarily large metadata. So my original concept was just expand the metadata to be a full 4K sector instead of 512 bytes, and leave a copy of the magic marker in the old offset so it would be backwards compatible. Instead, what we decided to do is keeping something similar to the old metadata format, although with most of the fields stripped out, and add a field to the metadata saying, all right, it's the newer version, and this new field, offset, says look over here. And it points to a location elsewhere on disk, somewhere earlier than this last sector. And then everything between that point and back to where the metadata actually is now metadata, so that you can have it be arbitrarily large. And at creation time, you'll basically decide on this size by setting the maximum number of keys that are supported. So the new extended metadata format will contain most of the same fields, except the end of it will be an array of this key struct. Instead of having a byte array that's just the initialization vector key, then the data key, then the HMAC of the key, it'll be a struct where each of those will be a separate field, but we'll store the number of iterations per key, so we can have that field once for every key, even if you have 10 keys. A set of flags per key to control some aspects of the key. We're thinking about having keys maybe have specific roles. So if you type in this alternative password instead of your correct password, it unlocks this other key that maybe does something different.
Destroy the whole disk?
Possibly. That's one of the options. That one's probably not that useful, but maybe.
Well, it's similar to the GBDE encryption that we have. But yeah.
The aux data field will go with the key and allow that key to have some arbitrary data stored with it. In particular, one option might be if you type in this key, it will cause the bootloader to boot the system from a different partition rather than decrypting your encrypted one.
Yeah, that is, wow, this is quite a design already.
Yeah. The working group was very productive. Sean Webb was there, and he points out in the chat room that we decided that one of the future features will be self-destructing keys. So you type in this key and it'll destroy the metadata. But we also decided that for the case of going through the border, one of the more useful ones might be type in this password and it boots, your normal looking computer option or whatever, rather than I think with Thomas Soom's chain loader support, we might even be able to make it boot Windows for you or something. So your computer looks normal and they don't look any closer at it. We talked a little bit about supporting a deniable version of Geli where the metadata is all encrypted or stored on a USB key or something such that it doesn't look like there's encrypted data there. Haven't quite sorted that one out yet. There's a URI field where you can specify where to get the additional key material. So one of the options everybody wants is keep part of the key on a USB stick and require that USB stick and optionally with or without a passphrase. So those two things get mixed together and boot the thing. But if you have multiple disks and other things, it's hard to figure out, A, if you require that in the current Geli, because there's no room to store that information, and B, which one. And so this field will allow us to say, here's a path to a file to get it from, or here's the GPT grid of the partition that this data lives in, or whatever. So you can have, say, one USB stick that contains 4 keys, one for each of your 4 hard drives or whatever. So we extended it that way. And then the 3 parts of each user key are stored separately, right? So we have the IV key, the data key, and the HMAC of those are all stored in separate fields now instead of just concatenated together, which in the future would allow us to have different hashing algorithms or whatever. Then all of that main metadata stores information including how many keys you're going to have and so on. And then the entire metadata has an HMAC over it with verified with the master key so that you can make sure that the metadata hasn't been modified maliciously as well. So with all those bits and a little bit of work, I think we'll have a very nice design and support all the bits. There's also a presentation by Ken Mary about SEDutil, SEDutil, which is a tool for managing your self-encrypting drives. So certain drives you buy from regular manufacturers like HDST or Seagate have this option where they encrypt everything on the disk and then use SEDutil to change the keys. This allows you to do something like, I wrote all this data to the disk, but I'm now changing the encryption key, so all that data has basically been destroyed in 1 second. I didn't have to overwrite everything. I destroyed the key and replaced it with a different one. So any attempt to decrypt that data will use the new key, which will just return a stream of gibberish.
Mm-hmm. So are guys starting to develop this now, or just decided who does what, or is this just a planning session?
For the new metadata, we mostly just planned it, but I think I'm going to do most of the work. It shouldn't be all that much.
Oh, okay.
And I got most of the context for it still in my head from doing the original Geli boot stuff. But that also led us into our other discussion, which was implementing Geli in the UEFI loader. Eric McCorkle's done most of the work for that, and we got some extra volunteers, including Sean Webb and Manu Dado, to agree to review the code and to test it out, and we're working on solving the last couple bugs there, as we really hope to get that committed soon as well.
Great.
And then extending it also to support this new metadata format, and make it so that you can boot from the encrypted disk and control everything with the USB key and so on. And then maybe looking at if a YubiKey can be used in this context as well.
Yeah. As more and more computers and laptops especially are getting UEFI loaders, or UEFI in general, this is a feature many people will want to appreciate.
Yep. Then I stuck around after the Dev Summit, and we had the Newcomers Orientation and Mentorship session, which was run by Michael W. Lucas. The idea was that people who it's first time attending the conference were paired up with people who've been here for many years, so that they always know a couple of people around the conference they can go up to and talk to if they have a question or need help or just want an introduction to somebody else, and so on. So make sure that the newcomers are having a good time, but also getting the most out of the conference. I know my first time at BSDCan, I didn't meet as many people as I should have. I didn't talk to as many people as I should have. I mostly followed the one person I do at the conference around the whole time and didn't really branch out like I should have. And so I'm glad we have these newcomer sessions now so that new people can meet a couple of people and get those first couple of conversations started, and they'll feel much better, I think.
Mm-hmm. After that, there was also the documentation lounge where Warren Block and I and Drew Levine joined us later as well, help people get into the documentation project and do their first commit there. And we had a couple of people there who were there last year as well. And that was a nice continuation of the work that we're doing in that area. And we had a couple of 2IX people there who wanted to also get commit bits and know the process and workflow to do that as well. And on the following night, which I wasn't there, but I heard that a couple of new people were there, and they also learned a couple of new things to write patches and submit their first documentation changes. So these are also the sessions that are going on in parallel to the hacker lounges.
Yep.
Okay.
This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems, who is a big sponsor of BSDCan as well, and they had quite a team of people out at the conference participating in the working groups and presenting stuff and giving talks and staffing their table where they talk to people. And
they had a good...
a big important part of the community at BSDCan and the BSD world in general.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they support development projects and conferences and also provide work for developers and upstream many of the changes that are using on their systems. And in general, they are very good community members and help out where they can with expertise.
They
and
also do a good job of making sure that there's a FreeBSD/FreeNAS booth at lots and lots of Linux conferences that wouldn't have any BSD representation if it wasn't for them.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a good way of showing that FreeNAS runs on their systems very well, and they demo their newest developments. You can also find many of these systems on their website, of course, in their configuration section, or you look at the FreeNAS Mini if you're looking for something for home use to solve all your storage data problems. And all of these, or many of them, will run ZFS, of course. So that makes sure your data is secure and will check itself for errors and correct them. And many of these storage solutions will be custom configured to you. If you call IX Systems, you get a very competent person knowing about your solution and also talking not about the most expensive systems all the time, but also the solutions that you want to have for your open source or for your project. So if you need a little bit more memory, they will tell you that, or they will give you a system that has better memory support. Or if you need the latest Intel servers, you always get those from IX Systems as well. And they are the ones who know which components fit well together and which should be avoided. And that is a testament to their rigorous testing and also their expertise in the field of building thousands of these solutions already.
Yeah, so whatever you need a machine for, you should talk to IX, tell them we sent you, and they'll get you hooked up straight away. And cut. I wasn't originally going to put the cut there, but I've decided to do it because we've been recording for an hour now.
Yeah. Just in case the recording crashes.
Well, not just that. It's just it's time for a cut.
A welcome break. Yeah.
And I think I will move this ad up a little bit, which might actually be harder than it looks, but it'll be fine.
Between the so that it's more of a break, visual break from the other parts.
Well, it's mostly just so that it ends up at the right point in the show. Anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So on this one, I didn't actually write notes for each thing, but I figured we'd talk a little bit about
more
the
freely.
sessions we went to and what we liked about them or whatever. We don't want to spend too much time on it because we've got almost enough of an episode already to start.
Yeah, and they're recorded anyway, and the slides are up so people can look at them.
But we can just, which sessions did you go to first after the keynote?
So I didn't go to any of the following sections because I I saw your talk already, and I was helping out a little bit at the foundation session or at the foundation table.
Right.
But the first I saw is, let's see, uh, the channel programs one, relatively late. Yeah, which is good.
All right.
Then you can do the morning of the first day.
Yep. And recording.
So that was just the first couple of conference days, because now the actual conference starts. So the Dev Summit is over now, and the tutorials have pretty much unwinded or have finished, and now the real conference day starts, which brings in a lot more people, which are following the talks. And we had a conference opened always by Dan Langell with a few words about attendee numbers and welcoming everyone to Ottawa and the conference. And then we had a keynote by Dr. Michael Geist. Geist actually means in German ghost, which is interesting. But he has a very outspoken man, a very interesting conversation that he had afterwards with the audience. And he talked about pretty much, he's a law professor at the University of Ottawa, and he talked about the threats and the challenges that pretty much everyone faces with putting technology out there, and governments and their rules and regulations and laws they put out sometimes don't match those, and some of the technical and community challenges that everyone faces in the modern
so
first
the
century.
keynote focused on what some of the current issues are, mostly in North America, but they apply to Europe as well. And in particular, how the technical community needs to get involved at all the levels of that. So part of that is just, letting your local representative know your thoughts on the matter, but even to the point of providing expert testimony in front of the government and so on, so that the only opinion the government is hearing isn't that of the telcos and the lobbyists, that there's actually, the other side is represented in this case. In particular, one of the interesting bits he passed on was that in Canada, the number of letters to your representative it takes to get them to pay attention to something is actually really low, because of the level of apathy, I suppose, in this particular, where people don't bother to do that very often, and so when they do, it gets some attention. But we talked about, making sure that we don't see the kind of embarrassing looking things where you see a politician announcing some thing, and then when they describe it, it's literally just the talking points they got from the lobbyists, because it's the only side of the argument they've heard. And so, they don't have any other information to go on. And part of that is maybe a failing of the technical community to explain that. Now, on the other side, one of the questions asked at the end was, how do we, this kind of semi-organized technical community, try to fight back against telcos and so on, with teams of lawyers and infinite time and money and a lot more motivation to have this go one way or the other.
Yeah, those were some questions asked, and he had some good answers for that as well. And Dan Langell actually mentioned at the end, it's going to get interesting when the introverts show up.
Yeah,
it's kind of
so the question period for the keynote ran quite a bit over time, which skewed the conference for the rest of the day. Well, I think we mostly caught up by stealing a little bit of time out of our lunch. Luckily, Dan gives us a fairly good chunk of time for lunch. But, we knew the keynote was good when the questions kept going long after the keynote was supposed to end.
Yeah. And it was a good keynote. So people were also talking afterwards to him, and then split up into 4 parallel sessions.
Yes, BSDCan had so much content this year. We had 4 rooms running concurrently. For the first set of talks, I didn't really have a choice. I had to go to the one in the big room because it was the one I was giving. So I talked a bit about abusing SSH for ZFS replication and some patches I'm working on there. There seemed to be quite a bit of interest in some of those, especially the basic set that will hopefully be upstream soon, and then the more advanced set, which is a little more specific, but there were still a few people interested in seeing that happen into the HPN patch set. And I discussed with Brian Drury, who's the maintainer of OpenSSH on FreeBSD, exactly what would be the best way to integrate that with his work.
Mm-hmm.
There were actually 5 tracks at that point because there was some presentations from the Dev Summit. Michael Tuxen demoed Packet Drill, which is a script-based tool for testing the network stack by injecting packets and so on.
Mm-hmm. I didn't go to any of the morning sessions because I was helping out at the foundation table, talking to people and handing out goodies and connecting with the community and talking to people there.
Yeah. As is typical with BSDCan, I wanted to go to all 4 of the talks after that. BSD in 60 days was apparently a very good talk that I didn't get to see, but it was about implementing BSDs and various tools for Australian NGO and NFP health services. So running rural health networks and so on using FreeBSD. So I'm looking forward to seeing the video of that one. Emmanuel Vado gave his talk about FreeBSD ARM before the kernel. I have a bit of an interest in that as I've spent so much time digging around in bootloaders lately that even though I don't use all that much ARM, I might be interested in knowing just how that works.
Yeah.
Then there was a dtrace internals talk. Luckily, I think I saw an earlier version of that at EuroBSDCon last year.
By Arun, which was a good one. Yeah.
Yep. And then Werner Losch gave a talk about back pressure up the I/O stack so that the I/O stack can tell the operating system upper layers, or could even tell the application, hey, the disk is pretty busy right now. How about you tell me which work you need to get done urgently and which stuff's less important so that it can schedule things better. So that was quite interesting, and his work I've had a bit of interest in, especially looking at dealing with it in ZFS and making ZFS play fair but also be as performant as possible.
Mm-hmm. In the lunch break, there was a couple of birds of a feather session. One on Tor on the BSDs, Poudriere Image BOF by Baptiste.
And that one was about building VM images and cloud images using Poudriere. So rather than building packages, actually building images of the base system.
Oh yeah, good. And the amateur radio and SDR didn't happen because the owner got sick of that, unfortunately. I was at the sponsors BOF, more or less by accident. But Deb Goodkin of the FreeBSD Foundation gave a little overview of stuff that the foundation is doing with regard to sponsoring and upcoming projects. And other projects also presented some of the ongoing sponsorship. For example, Hyper-V support for OpenBSD was presented there. And that got a couple of good claps because that was an exciting announcement. In the afternoon, there were also a couple of interesting talks. There was MP-Safe networking in NetBSD, current status and future direction, the realities of dtrace on FreeBSD by Brian Kidney, and building products based on OpenZFS using channel programs by Matt Ahrens. We touched on the channel programs earlier in the show, but this one got into much more detail about what channel programs are, and I attended that one. And in parallel to this was also adding wireless sensors to FreeBSD using a cheap USB TV sticks instead of a soldering iron. I'm not sure whether this one also didn't work, but I might be wrong there.
I thought that was the one that was canceled and the BOF wasn't. I don't actually know.
That could be, yeah. There might be some mix-up here on my part, but yeah, we'll see it in the recordings when they come out. And most of the session or the talk hosts have already uploaded their slides to the BSDCan website, so we might as well cover those in the future show if they are available. Then in the afternoon, after coffee and snacks, we had new talks. PF plus R domains create splendid multi-tendency firewalls by Philip Bühler, who was the up-to-then goat herder at that point, and he promptly stuck up the goat at that table, which is nice. The other session was Where is IPv6 Going by Massimiliano, and the IT Infrastructure Community Norms by Julie Percival, and Continuous Integration of the FreeBSD Project by Li Wen.
Mm-hmm.
Followed by the OpenBSD Web Stack by Michael W. Lucas, telling everyone about HTTPD, CARP, and RelayD, which he finished the book and had for sale at the conference as well. There's also a talk by Mihai Karavas, Save Restore feature for bhyve x86.
I went to that one. It was very interesting to see how they're working through the issues to actually be able to pause and resume a bhyve.
Yeah, we support Mihai and this university work by sponsoring some of the students with foundation money to get some certain features into bhyve. And that is an interesting collaboration that we do with universities, and we might extend this type of collaboration with other universities or with that one in the future, depending on how good it works as a model. The State of Network Security Tools on BSD by Michael Shirk was also in that talk slot. And Debugging the Debugger, Sami Bara, which prompted me to pretty much prompt other interesting titles like Compiling the Compiler and things like that, Linking the Linker and things like that. But that was also a good talk, like what kind of errors you can find in the debugger and how you can debug that if you like chicken and egg problems like that are interesting to solve.
And then the day wrapped up with the work in progress session, which was hosted by Michael W. Lucas. I opened it up by presenting my work on Z standard in ZFS. Drew Gallatin from Netflix presented his work on doing larger MBUFs. So writing up to, I think, 96K of data to the network stack at once instead of in smaller chunks, or chaining a bunch of small chunks together. They found that with that, they get about an 8% reduction in the CPU utilization when they're pushing 90 gigabits of TLS encrypted traffic. So it drops their CPU usage from about 40% to 32%. So looking forward to seeing that. Dan Langell presented about Let's Encrypt, specifically the acme.sh tool and how he's implementing that for his workflow. And he also did a second one about Bacula and how that works and where that's currently at. Sami Albahara presented about Concurrency Kit, which is a set of primitives to allow open source projects to get access to, lockless data structures and concurrency derived algorithms and so on, without having to worry about patent encumbered options.
Mm-hmm. And everyone
there were a couple other work in progress things that I couldn't remember last night when I was writing the notes.
Yeah, that was maybe we have a list from Michael Lucas. Everyone was, since the session was new, and he pretty much time boxed everyone up to 5 minutes, and everyone followed that because there was some threats of throwing punches and stuff, but more jokingly than in real. But everyone had the 5-minute mark so that they knew not to talk too much, and we had no slides there, but everyone was just briefly informed of the stuff that was going on, and this might maybe something, a talk we see at a future conference.
Yeah, we have a similar work in progress session in Tokyo, and it's always quite good. And then there's another whole day of BSDCan.
Yes, because we hadn't enough yet already.
Yes. Thankfully, because Dan is a merciful soul, BSDCan starts an hour later on the second day.
Thankfully.
You don't have to be there until 10 a.m.
Yeah, the hacker lounges can get a little bit long at BSDCan, so people wake up late.
So then starting at 10 a.m., we had a number of other talks, including one about sysadm, one for creating a Torified network with FreeBSD on a Raspberry Pi 3, one about OpenBSD's VMM and VMD, the virtual machine daemon, and how that worked. And then Benno Rice gave a version of The Trouble with FreeBSD. How did the FreeBSD community become what it is today?
Mm-hmm. And some of the challenges and obstacles we had to overcome in the past.
Then there was talking about hardening package source, TCP SIM floods, how Ethernet is not simply pieces of string, and was about an implementation of spanning tree for FreeBSD.
I went to that one.
Yep. That's where I intended to go, but I ended up in the toolchain session instead.
Huh.
I think because I ended up not leaving for after the previous one because I was talking to somebody, and then I was like, oh, I better stop talking now because the next talk is starting.
Yeah, that's happening sometimes at conferences. You make a schedule and then you deviate a lot because there's hallway tracks and discussions going on, which is good, but it screws up your talk schedule.
That talk was running a bit late, so I ducked out near the end and grabbed my lunch and headed over to the other room where I hosted the ZFS Birds of a Feather session. And at the same time, Michael Shirk was running the BSD user groups session. In the ZFS BOF, myself, Matt Ahrens, and George Wilson answered questions. I demoed my Z standard work and talked a bit about the different compression results that you get with that. And I got a bit of time to talk with Matt and George about the actual implementation, and I think we've solved the last of the problems that were there. And this will hopefully mean that we can get this finished and upstream very soon.
Yeah, and also your top output got a lot, or got some feedback by George and Matt.
Yes.
So
George, who created the ZFS compressed arc feature, and Matt, I showed them the output of top on FreeBSD, and they were they liked the way it was done, and they provided a bit of feedback based on the design question I had about how to calculate the ratio the best way, whether certain fields should be included or not. And it was interesting because at one point Matt was like, what number does that, what qualifies as overhead in this number here? You know, does that include this other stuff? Is that just the debuffs, or has it got other stuff? And it was interesting to see, you know, a ZFS question that Matt didn't know the answer to off the top of his head.
Well, those were implementation details.
In the end, was a good thing because it shows that ZFS is growing beyond just the work that the core group of people are doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you committed those changes already to the FreeBSD source tree. Next up, after those buffs, were 4 sessions. One was IP forwarding FastPath by Nanako Momiyama. I was at that one, which is interesting because she presented her work that's basically her thesis, and that was also into the IP space, how to make the Veil switch run faster for Beehive and the NetMap framework. And the other session was Kylie Liang presenting on how to build high-performance PF and websites with FreeBSD in the cloud, connecting that talk we had the other day in the sponsor session with the Open BSD on Azure announcement. The Universal Userland one by Sean Chittenden, Why Do We Need to Be Different, is an interesting question he posed there. And the other session
that one was about making a universal userland for like Solaris, BSD, and Linux in Rust or Go, so that the tools will actually be the same across all three, which is a interesting idea.
Yeah, so that's exciting. And the other talk in that session was Generic ARM by Andrew Turner, creating a single kernel configuration for FreeBSD/ARMv6. So that's more unified and a single file covering most of these architectures.
Yeah, I ended up talking to people in the hallway and missed all of those talks. And the first 20 or so minutes of all the next ones, and decided rather than trying to sneak in the room, I would just keep talking in the hallway. And then it was 4 o'clock. And
suddenly, it was all very soon over. And we also tried to hunt down a couple of people for interviews, but we didn't succeed. But we'll cover for that.
The conference was too busy.
Yeah, you run from one room to the next, you meet people, you talk a lot to others, and they talk about you. For example, we had a couple of BSD Now watchers and listeners coming up to me randomly and welcoming me and giving me feedback, so that was very nice. So that's all what a conference is all about. And putting time away for an interview is difficult if you want to be into the excitement. But other sessions in the afternoon were...
we had there was the from microservices to monoliths, which was apparently quite popular. Then they had Sec Model Sandbox, which is NetBSD sandboxing. John Hickson talked about NFS v4 ACLs, and Bjorn Zeeb did From the Outside, measuring and understanding FreeBSD using the Gem 5 simulator, which is comparing what you think the code does to what it actually does, which is interesting.
Yep. The microservices and monoliths talk was also very good. The slides are up yet already, and he also posted a couple of questions for the project that are something we might discover or might want to get more into, because some of these are actually quite interesting development projects we could do.
Cool.
After
the final
those,
set of talks had me torn in all four directions. I really wanted to be in all four of those rooms at the same time. Luckily, I guess I saw an earlier version of Sam's talk about crash dumps in Tokyo. So I went to FreeBSD's Influences, which is about porting FreeBSD's Hyper-V drivers to Illumos. Then there was Oblivious Sandboxing by John Anderson, which is about trying to apply Capsicum to an application without modifying its code, so that you could run, applications you didn't write in Capsicum sandboxes. Luckily, that one will be presented again at VBSDCon, so I plan to see it there. And I missed out on Rod Grimes presenting FreeBSD as a service, the challenges and opportunities to better use FreeBSD in enterprise environments.
Mm-hmm.
Looking forward to the video of that one.
Yeah, those were popular talks. And I mean, if you cannot attend all four talks in parallel, then you pretty much are needing those recordings and want to look out for them in the future. Mm-hmm. So we'll announce it on the show when most of these are done. Wrapping up, in the closing session, Dan Langell had the honor of doing yet another auction with the cool stuff from the conference and other items that were donated. So there was a bunch of auction swag. So Michael Lucas' wife Liz had Gruff fundraiser pins. So during the conference, you could get a unique Gruff pin by donating more than the last person. So it was a cumulative upkeep pretty much to either the FreeBSD or OpenBSD Foundation. And that was running at like 150 euros or so, dollars.
Yeah. Yeah. It started off relatively low, but every time somebody wanted a pin, they'd make a bigger donation and get a pin, and then it would keep going up.
Yep.
Yes, and Liz made a cool puffy keychain out of the art from the RelayD and HTTPD Mastery book, which is Puffy, as Ahab attacking the whale. Then there was this FreeBSD church key, which is a bottle opener. And then there was a puffy wine stopper, so that you can...
Yeah, with all the beads were handmade by Liz, so that was kind of nice for the wine drinkers.
The people at Semibug, which is Michael Lucas's local BSD user group in Southeast Michigan, donated the Detroit Sampler Pack, which is a bunch of items that represent Detroit and so on. And there's interesting food items and so on. It was quite interesting. I donated the last Canadian edition of FreeBSD Mastery Advanced ZFS, where ZFS is spelled ZEDFS throughout the book, and there's extra footnotes making fun of me that aren't in the real book and so on. And I donated a Pentium G4400 CPU. This is a lowish end Skylake CPU that supports ECC or non-ECC RAM. Very nice for NASs and FreeNASs and so on.
Mm. Guess who won that one?
I ended up winning it back.
That's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
But it's a nice... I mean, all these auction money goes to charity, to the Ottawa mission, and it's for a good cause. So there's some funny elements.
If you've read Git Commit Murder, you'll be happy to know that Peter Hessler donated the pen for the third time. or the second time or whatever. And although he didn't win it back this time, somebody
Ah,
outbid him.
that broke the cycle.
So, well, if that person comes back next year and puts the pen back in the auction, is the cycle really broken?
I don't know. I'm not that far in the book yet, so.
Yeah. The Theodorat donated his autographed conference badge, and the winner was wearing it around at the closing party. It was amusing. David Maxwell did a very nice one. He donated a super large print of the group photo from the FreeBSD Developer Summit last year, and a smaller version of it as well. The smaller version went to George Wilson, who's an Illumos developer who's getting more and more into FreeBSD as I sinisterly bring him into our community. But the very large one went to me, and I hope in time for next week's episode will be pre-recorded. But by the time we do another live episode of this, it should be replacing this map behind me here with the big group photo of FreeBSD developers.
Oh yeah, that would look nice.
Yeah.
I mean, the map is okay, but
it's
also some nice tribute.
Yeah. So Colin Percival of Tarsnap sponsored the T-shirts for the Dev Summit this year and put the slogan "What is Core going to do about it?" or "What is Core doing about it?" on the back of the shirt. And so the members of Core autographed one of those T-shirts, and we auctioned that off.
Yep, that was a nice thing to do, and that also got
it wasn't autographed by John Baldwin, but there was a unconvincing forgery. And
someone has his someone has his signature right on the.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's nice to have this, and this went for like $100 or something.
Yeah, quite a bit for a T-shirt with some magic marker on it. Of course, speaking of T-shirts with magic marker on it, someone took one of the leftover conference T-shirts, the regular BSDCan ones, and wrote "I heart FreeBSD" on it in magic marker, and the FreeBSD PF maintainer bid $150 to force Henning Brouwer, the OpenBSD PF creator maintainer, to wear the T-shirt to the closing ceremony or to the closing party. So $150 went to charity, and Henning had to wear this "I love FreeBSD" shirt around for the rest of the night. Of course, as he did last year, he charged $10 to get a selfie taken with him, and this resulted in an additional $500 worth of donations.
Wow. Yeah, pretty much everyone wanted to take his photo with him, but they needed to pay money to get that.
Yep. Of course, all the money went to the charity. So here's Michael W. Lucas and Groff getting their photo taken with Henning. And we have Michael Dexter.
Of course.
Here's the FreeBSD Foundation interns. You can see Shiva there. Then Eric Joyner from Intel, Ed Mass from the Foundation, Henning, and Charlie, the other intern, saying they're welcoming the new FreeBSD PF maintainer. Pierre Panchery from the the NetBSD project and package source. There's another sysadmin getting their picture taken with Henning. Michael Shirk, he said he had no choice, it was for charity. He and Henning getting their picture taken together. There we have Calvin Hendricks Parker getting his picture taken. There's Rake and Henning together. The very first one actually went out for Rod. Rod got his picture taken with Henning in the hallway.
Earlier than the others.
Yep. Jim Thompson. And then he's not actually in the picture because he took the picture, I guess. But Sean Chittenden got the picture taken, and he put the Theodorat badge that he won in the auction around Henning for it to confuse people. It's like one of those memes you see with like it's a Dalek from Doctor Who, and it says, I loved R2-D2 in Star Trek or whatever. And so it's Henning, but he's wearing a badge that says Theo, but he's wearing a T-shirt that says I love FreeBSD. It's like you're mixing all the peanut butter and the chocolate. And then David Duncan also got his picture taken. That was about all the pictures I could find. I'm sure there are more out there, and maybe we try to put them together into Grof's photo book.
For people to remember those nice moments. Of course, where you can put also your stuff is at the sponsors that we have this week. One of them is DigitalOcean.
Yes,
which provides...
you can get a droplet for as little as $5 a month or a fraction of a cent per hour. But if you combine that with their block storage, you can attach anywhere from 1 gigabyte to 16 terabytes of storage to that VM and run that as ZFS or something else if you're silly, and store all of your photos there and only pay for the number of gigabytes you actually need.
And they also provide an easily scaled block storage volume from 1 gigabyte to 16 terabytes, and you resize them as you need them. Yeah, which is nice. It's also highly available storage, so you can make sure that it's been replicated between these DigitalOcean droplets in multiple data centers, and those are only a fraction of the things that DigitalOcean provides.
Yep, they have the load balancer. They have a new cloud firewall feature. You can get private networking between your droplets so that you can avoid using up your public bandwidth for that. Lots of different things you can do there. But it's super easy to get started. Their control panel is very nice, but you can, trade that for their nice command line interface via the API or script the API yourself, whatever you want to do. And they have locations all over the world, including San Francisco, Toronto, New York, London, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Singapore, and Bangalore.
Yeah, those are the ones. And if you sign up, you can get a $5 credit. Was it $5 last time? $10 even. Yeah.
Yes. So when you sign up, go into your account and put in the coupon code FreeBSD now, and you'll have an extra $10 added to your account so that you can keep playing with it.
And you can also deploy pre-built applications if you want to run a blog. There's already blog software mostly configured for you, so you only need to provide your own little credentials for that and run your own website. Or if you want to run a Django app or any other, a wiki or a MongoDB, anything you might think of, they have a couple of pre-built applications there. And they also have a good community session where people can provide tutorials that they've written about server software, or basically tutorials that you could run on any of those DigitalOcean droplets.
Then we have the namesake for the episode, which was libtrue.
This is something that happens sometimes at conferences because people get bored, and if you have a couple of developers at a conference, things happen. Interesting things.
Yeah, so Brian Drury sent an email to the FreeBSD developers list that looked like one of the regular commit mails that goes through. And it looked like it was a commit to the man page for the true command, documenting that it supports libxo, which is the library we have to make an application be able to output JSON and XML in addition to the regular plain text output. What's interesting about it is technically the true command did already support that because it never outputs anything. So you can output nothing as JSON or XML without having to change the code at all. So he was just adding to the main page. And, people were immediately jumping on it. It's like, is it really necessary to link it to that library? It's like, well, no, it doesn't need to be linked to the library. It already supports the --libxo subcommand because it just ignores the extra arguments. And so it went on and on. And this eventually spawned Andrew Turner to start libtrue, which is a library that returns true, and then the true binary that's a wrapper around it. And then it went on from there as people created pull requests implementing Capsicum on it, and then implementing libxo on it for real, so it could actually output a JSON true value. There's like a Python binding. I think that in progress there's a Go binding. There's a Vagrant and Ansible playbook to create a VM that returns true. Mark Johnson added trace support, so you can probe the function and see it returning true. It's added a code of conduct. It's got a website now, which is a subproject in the repo, and it's got a website, libtrue.xyz, and all these other things. I think currently there are 6 contributors, 54 commits, 4 open pull requests, and 53 open PRs, even though a bunch of those have already been closed.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you think this is funny and want to contribute to that, you can find the GitHub repo in our show notes for libtrue. And while this, all joking aside, it's also a good introduction of how some things are being developed and how you can put certain things with libxo support and how libraries are structured and things like that. Even it's a small and actually quite silly example. It gives you an idea how you would put these things together in a more serious software application or a library.
It's actually an example of how you would implement Capsicum and libxo and a bunch of these other things in a small application.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to show, how collaborative you can actually be when you get a bunch of people sitting around a couple of tables in the hacker lounge, and the amount of giggling that results from it. At one point, I was reading through some of the issues in it, and I just looked up a little bit, and I was like, so who's Trombone Hero on GitHub? And as John Anderson goes to say, that would be me. He gets to about that would, and everyone at the table immediately points at him without looking up from their keyboard, or from their screens. And I was just like, oh, everybody knows exactly who's the troublemaker in this case.
Yeah, things like that keep the conferences exciting, even though you're tired at the end of a long day. The hacker lounges are always things that make people come back to the BSDCan conference.
Yep.
Speaking of conferences, we have an article about doing conference speaking. So this one,
I'm sure a bunch of people are a little jealous of us and feel like we're rubbing it in by talking about all this great stuff that happened at BSDCan. But we're really doing it for your own good. We're trying to convince you to come next year. And one of the easiest ways to get to one of these conferences, whether it's, BSDCan, EuroBSDCon, Asia BSDCon, the recently announced BSD Taiwan, which will be in November. That's
BSDCon.
BSD Taiwan's the only one that'll still be accepting new talks for the year, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So all the other ones are closed. So if you want to go to one of these conferences, one of the best ways to do it is by giving a talk, because then they help you with the flight and the hotel and so on. And it's a great experience. So we thought we'd provide this insight from someone else who, as you can see from this picture, has spoken at many different conferences, and they have some insight on their process for developing a talk and giving it at many conferences.
Yeah, so he divided those up into phases. So phase 1 is basically the idea, where you sit down and ponder what you could speak about, and over the years you collect certain items that you find interesting to talk about, or topics that are in need or are in everyone's head they want to listen to and want to probably get out into a wider audience. Phase 2 is the call for proposals. So in the end, you come up with a good pitch that pretty much speaks to as many people as possible and with a speculative outline. And then you pretty much look out for conferences that have these and submit to those with your talk proposal. Which goes into phase 3, waiting for the call for paper result, which is a little bit, will I be accepted? Will I be accepted? It's an exciting time, but sometimes you totally forget about the call for papers.
Asia BSDCon 2 years ago, or for 2015, Hiroki had some trouble with his email server, meaning I didn't get the email saying I was accepted. And then a little bit later, I got an email being like, hurry up and make your travel arrangements. I'm like, I didn't know I was going to HBSC.
Yeah, sometimes this can end in disaster, but yeah, it got solved. So waiting for those sometimes is like, oh, I submitted to too many conferences and I got accepted at too many of them, and now I have a scheduling conflict. Things like that are
Yes,
a good
that
problem to
happened
have, I guess.
to VBSDCon. One of the speakers had to cancel.
Oh, too bad. But yeah, this is the phase 3. Going into phase 4, the road to an outline. So once the talk is accepted, research intensifies. So you pretty much put in everything in your talk, or trying to put everything in, which is difficult because you only have usually a 1-hour talk slot. And there you try to focus on putting everything important into that, and distilling it a little bit and just put the good parts in, or the important ones. Leading into phase 5, the slides. The author writes of that article, I have a very strong opinion on slides. Use few big words. Don't make people read your slides unless it's code samples. Otherwise, they'll be distracted from what you say. You'll see me rarely use fonts smaller than 100 point, code with 40 point or even 60 point, which is readable from everywhere and forces me to be as brief as possible. Yes, that is
trying to fit code on slides has always been a trouble for me.
Yeah, I mean, bits and pieces you want to explain with the code, but you shouldn't post the whole big from main to finish, basically. But yeah, it's a good advice for people who haven't created many slides for conference talks before. Leading up into phase 6, polishing. I firmly believe that this phase makes or breaks a talk. Only by participating again and again, by practicing again and again, you'll notice rough spots, weak transitions, and redundancies. So polishing is important, and practicing the actual talking, making sure that it has a good flow to the whole talk and topic you're giving. Leading to phase 7.
I did a lot of that, especially my very first one. I remember it was a talk where I actually did it with another person, which that was the first time I'd done that, and the only time I've done that since is with that one you and I did in Germany at the Open Source Data Center conference. Practicing it. Part of that is just to make sure you get the right amount of length, like so that you fit the time slot properly. But it does help you notice stuff after you give the talk to the wall or to the mirror a couple of times.
Yeah, that helps. And the spots were a little bit shaky, and the second time are usually better, and the third time is then always the quality, or how many times you need the quality you will usually also provide at the actual talk later on. Phase 7 is the sneak preview. So in the past years, he was blessed with the opportunity to test my talks in front of a smaller audience. Interestingly, I've come to take smaller events more seriously than the big ones. And if a small conference pays for his travels and gives him a prominent spot, I have both more responsibility and attention than if I would pay my money to an event where I'm one of the many speakers. Yeah, that's true. If you practice
I know Michael Lucas always demos his talks at the BSD user group near him before he gives it at a conference. And, that's a great way to do it. Find a user group meeting nearest you and present it there first. You can get, more feedback and stuff on it from a smaller group of people in a much less daunting setup than, in front of the giant crowd at a BSD conference, or, the huge crowd at something like FOSDEM or something where there's 4,000 people watching.
Yeah, which can be a little bit overwhelming. That's why we have phase 8, refinement and more polishing. So the first session is always just going through all the slides, reacquainting yourself with the deck, and when it always takes quite a bit of willpower until you do a full practice run, and the first time always isn't perfect, of course, but you tend to forget that pretty fast, he writes. On the other hand, it rather quickly comes back too, which makes it even harder to motivate yourself to start. And ideally, you'd have access to a video recording from phase 7 to have a closer look at what would work and what could be improved. But since it's usually a smaller conferences, he doesn't do that, depending on how big the conferences you're being accepted at. Phase 9 is the travel. And you have to go to the conference first to give your talk, of course. And whenever he travels to conferences, he brings everything he needs for the talk and then some. To make sure he doesn't forget anything essential, he has a packing list for his business trips, and he provides links to that one as well in this blog post. With the Epic packing list for business trips is similar, and he writes that he prints it out a day before departure and crosses stuff off as he packs, and highly recommends it to anyone to emulate that, since packing isn't a lot less stressful if you just follow a checklist.
Yep.
Leading to phase 10, showtime. So this is it, the moment everyone's been working and looking forward to. People who suffer from fear of public speaking think this is the worst part, but if you scroll back, you realize this is the payoff, because you prepared so much, and this is actually what you've been working towards. This is the fun, easy part, and people enjoy it on the stage. I see many of the speakers at conferences that have done this for a couple of years are actually trying to get this feeling again, to be in front of an audience and provide a good talk. And once you stand in front of the audience, the work is done and you get to enjoy the ride. Yeah, so that's a good article outlining everything around conference speaking, and has much more details about what tools to use, and recommendations, and other stuff people want to check out first if they are giving a talk at a future conference.
Yeah, there's an interesting one here. It says, it absolutely doesn't mean that I don't get nervous with 200 to 800 eyeballs are pointed at me. My pulse goes up and my hands start shaking like anyone else. But I came to accept and even enjoyed the symptoms because they taper off. It's like bungee jumping, except with the bigger risk of causing a viral video of you tripping over a cable or forgetting your own name.
Yeah. I mean, things happen, but if you prepare more, they are less likely to happen. And small slip-ups are usually not that bad, and most people tend to forget that because they're happy that they aren't in the same situation. Okay, this will lead us into our Beastie Bits section for this week.
Oh, hold on.
And
we cut before that.
Okay.
There's another 45-minute segment. All right, and we can pound to the last bit, and then we'll be done. Okay. Good golly, the time is ridiculous.
Yeah, excitement at conferences tend to go a little bit longer. Yep. Well, we could cut this into 2 episodes for next week. Do we have enough material to take this into 2?
Probably not quite. And we didn't put the ads in the right spots to do that.
All right.
Well, let's try to bang out the rest of this real quick anyway.
Mm-hmm. Because they're only bits and pieces anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
And recording.
This week in Beastie Bits, we have a couple of items. The first one is Discourse TrueOS Q&A by Chris Moore and Ken Moore. And that is pretty much some information about the discourse they're doing this Friday on June 16th.
Yeah, they're having a live chat event this Friday, June 16th at 1:30 p.m. Eastern. So if you jump over to the live thread and the link provided here, you'll be able to ask them whatever questions you have live for, I'm guessing they'll keep going until they get bored of you.
Yeah, it's like an office hour. If you
keep the questions coming, I imagine you can soak up most of the day on that.
Mm-hmm. Which is good. I mean, we can get feedback from the community. Okay, yeah, that one is nice. And another item that we have this week is a new home for the repository conversions. NetBSD Git Mirror is now on github.com. And there's an announcement on the mail index netbsd.org webpage. It says, hello all, the repository conversion setup for NetBSD CVS to Fossil to Git has found a new home. And ironically, on former cvs.netbsd.org hardware, this provides a somewhat faster conversion cycle as well as removing anon cvs.freebsd.org from the process. And that pretty much is an ongoing effort to get into Git development for the NetBSD project.
Yep. So it's available on GitHub as well?
Yep, check that out and see how the conversion goes. We'll probably cover that in a future episode.
Then they have a post here. A user has created a set of tab completions for OpenBSD's KSH or Korn shell. It's got a bunch of stuff for VMCTL and a bunch of other similar tools.
Okay, so OpenBSD people might want to look at that if they're using KSH.
Yep. In particular, compared to other shells, KSH is only 20,000 lines of code, while ZSH is 127,000, Fish is 207,000, and Bash is 350,000.
Yeah, that's a lot in comparison.
Just a reminder, Package Source Conf is coming up July 1st and 2nd in London, so that's only about 2 weeks away, so hopefully you've already made your travel plans, but if not, you need to hurry up and do that. It'll be interesting to see the group of people that show up there, with it being a mix of, NetBSD, SmartOS, Minix, Linux, Mac, BSD, etc. users using all the different package sets.
Oh, nice. Yeah, this is a good way of getting more out of the package source developers or contributing something or see generally what's happening.
Yep.
Our next item is OpenBSD 6.1 syspatch installed SP kernel and multiprocessor systems. So Aaron Riekenberg writes, have a 6.1 AMD 64 MP system running the generic MP kernel from the installation. MP was automatically chosen by the installer. This is an Intel Atom 330 dual core box. And then he describes pretty much that he ran syspatch on it and goes over the steps to replicate this into a multiprocessor system, I guess. Yeah, from what I gleaned from the.
So it looks like the syspatch tool on OpenBSD patches machine and installed a single processor kernel instead of the multiprocessing kernel, and he can't use the second core now.
That's how it. Okay, yeah, that's kind of bad. And I guess there will be follow-ups to address this issue.
Yeah, looks like there's a whole thread discussing it already.
Oh, good. So if you're bit by that bug, you might want to check out that article. And our last Beastie Bit for this week is Knoxbug meeting this Friday. So they announced that, and you should join them on the National FreeBSD Day, which is June 19. So we have a couple of actions planned with the foundation. We'll do a couple of videos, a couple of tutorials, and there may be some local events from user groups joining into that one. So June 19th is National FreeBSD Friday. And Knoxbug has their meeting there.
June 19th is a Monday.
Oh,
the Knoxbug meeting is on the
right.
Friday.
Yeah,
but FreeBSD Day is on the Monday.
They're pretty much preparing for that or start the early celebration in that. Which is good. Yep.
Yes. In honor of the FreeBSD Day, Knoxbug will be doing an Install Fest. They're doing Install Fest on the Monday in addition to their Friday meeting.
Oh, good. Then we have people who don't have time on Friday can go to the Monday event, or they have a write-up somewhere where people can follow it up, I guess.
Yep. This week's episode is also brought to you by Tarsnap, who is, as I mentioned, the t-shirt sponsor for BSDCan, and we thank Colin and rest of Tarsnap for that. But if you need to back up data, you really should do it safely. And if you want to do it safely, you need to use Tarsnap.
Yeah, because you get online backups for the truly paranoid stored in the Amazon AWS cloud, but you are the only person holding the key to the actual real data. The rest of the world doesn't get to it.
Yeah, all the data is encrypted on your computer using your key, and then the data is shipped out to the internet after. and your key never leaves your possession, and it's not possible for Colin, Tarsnap, or anyone else to access your data when it's in the cloud.
Yep, and if you know how to use tar, the tool to compress data or combine data into a little tar archive, then you also know how to use Tarsnap because it's based on the same command line utilities and basically the same. Yeah, all the tooling is there, and you pretty much find yourself familiar immediately with the tools.
So, on to the questions.
Yeah, we have feedback this week from Rob about FreeNAS Corral. And he writes, "Hi guys, love the show and been watching it since it came on the air. During an interview with Chris Moore and regarding the changes at IX System, the FreeNAS project, I've been wondering about the development environment used for Corral. As Chris has indicated, work has begun to change the web framework from the 9.x to the 10x version of FreeNAS, and then Montage was picked up. Chris has indicated that Montage was no longer supported, but did not indicate how the Corral version of FreeNAS was completed, rather than using Montage or not a framework, and if so, which one? I think that the Corral interface is pretty compelling, and I'd like to know more about the problems that the FreeNAS team faced in developing it, design decisions, and how the end product was developed."
You'd have to ask Chris more about that in particular, but most of the part of Corral is getting dropped is not the interface bits. It's, the NAS bits that didn't work. But yeah, as far as development environment for the JavaScript stuff, I have no idea. Sorry.
Yeah, this is pretty much web development internals, and you might want to post this on the FreeNAS forums, and there are a couple of developers hanging out there, and they are the ones that can answer your questions in that particular area of the project. Okay, next up is Brad with ZFS Snapshot Strategy. And he writes, "Hello, Alan and Benedict. Just a quick question. What are your recommended strategies for ZFS snapshots? I recall many moons ago, Alan saying something about taking a snapshot every hour, keeping one of those snapshots as a daily, keeping one of the dailies for a month, and keeping a monthly for a year. Unfortunately, I don't remember whether that was here or in TechSnap, and that is a lot of content to go through to find one comment."
Yeah, so I use ZFS Tools, which is a little program that can do that. And yeah, depends on the workload. On some of the machines, we take snapshots as frequently as every 15 minutes. And then we keep the ones at the top of the hour for, so we keep the 15-minute ones for like 4 hours. And then after that, we get rid of all the ones except for the ones that are at the top of the hour. And then once it's a day old, we only keep the ones every 12 hours. And then back, and you can prune it any way you want.
Yeah, there's also an example in the FreeBSD book, FreeBSD Mastery ZFS, or is it Advanced ZFS? One of those two has the write-up, and there's also a blog post about that on Michael W. Lucas' website a couple of years ago already, but that pretty much has still accurate information how you set this up and keep regular snapshots, because the tools pretty much do the recycling of the snapshots for you to create the daily, monthly, weekly, yearly snapshots.
Yeah, I don't have any snapshots that are a year old. That's my data moves too much for that, and I would run out of free space.
Mm-hmm. The other question he has is, I also remember talking to Chris about this question back in the days of 10.2 or 10.3, and he said that the snapshot frequency would wind up bogging down the system or something similar. His recommendation was 1 snapshot per day.
Well, having one every 15 minutes, if you have a lot of data sets and you don't prune them after, say, 6 hours, will eventually, that's quite a few snapshots, and trying to get a list of the snapshots will take longer. But in general, like writing data to the data set doesn't take any longer, it doesn't matter how many snapshots you have, although the operations that actually look at the list of snapshots will take longer.
Yep. And if you have a lot of data changing between these 15 minutes on a snapshot, logically the snapshot itself will be a bit bigger each time. If you have nothing changed, then the snapshots are pretty much 0 or just a couple of bytes.
Yeah, he writes the life preserver on my laptop is set to take one once an hour.
Yeah. It depends on how paranoid you are of disks dying or preserving snapshots for a certain amount of days or years or how long ever.
Yep.
In the rest of his mail, he writes, I'm on TrueNAS 12 now, and while Live Preserver has been rolled into SysADM, I've had my trials and tribulations with all as well. So what do you recommend for snapshot frequency and retention, and what tools do you use to make it happen? Well,
I use ZFS tools. What do you use?
Yeah, same here. It's easy to set up, and it's pretty much a cron job running, and I totally forget about it until I actually need the snapshots, and then I'm happy. Oh, there are the other snapshots, and I pick just this one, and that's just right before the change I did I want to undo, and that helps me sleep a little bit better each night, knowing that they are there in case I need them, and if I don't need them, they're not in the way, and it's just a matter of, well, if I do ZFS list -t snapshot, they will also show up because they have a lot of snapshots listed there, of course, but I can also filter that out. It's actually a quite easy tool to use. But there are others as well who have similar retention policies. Hope that answers your question. Next up is Phil with ZFS send via snail mail. Interesting concept. He writes, say I have 2 servers located across the country from one another with limited bandwidth and slow connections with several terabytes of data. Want a backup of the other? Is it possible to do, say, a ZFS send where the changes are checked via the connection, but the data is written to a local pool that can be shipped to the second server? Currently, he has 2 FreeNAS boxes, one Mini XL and the other Homebrew soon to be a Mini XL. In the near future, I will be moving to where satellite internet or cell service are the only options. I would like to retain this other service as an offsite backup, as well as using it for one good internet connection on the end-to-end or to send new content back.
Yeah, so you can do that. So when you do a ZFS send, it creates a standalone data stream that you could write to a disk or to a tape or to a Blu-ray or whatever and ship it to the other side and then pipe that file into ZFS receive and it will apply the data. Then you can do incrementals and you could mail them as well. You know, just do an incremental from the last snapshot to the new snapshot, write that ZFS stream to a file on a disk of some kind and ship it and it'll work. So you could do that. And then once you've got it caught up enough, if your change level is low enough, then you could just use, ZFS replication over the internet to keep it up. Although if you're dumping a lot of extra files, then you can just ship additional Blu-rays or whatever, or discs or however you want to do it.
Yep, and that can be catched up with your incrementals that you might get in there, which is good. I mean, if you have these problems with low connectivity or no connectivity at all for a certain amount of time, then that's pretty much the only way of keeping up with the pool changes in that area. But it's good that you're using ZFS for that problem because other file systems don't have that feature and you pretty much have to copy everything all over again. There are not so many good solutions to catch up with the holes that you have in the meantime. Okay, that hopefully helps. There's also a section about that on the ZFS books. And our last feedback and question for today is Philip. Network limits for public NTP servers. And he writes, hi guys, as a long-time Linux sysadmin, I decided to spin up a FreeBSD VM to join to the public NTP pool as an opportunity to start playing with FreeBSD outside of FreeNAS. Obviously, having a publicly accessible NTP server creates a lot of network traffic, perhaps too much from what I've seen. Forgive me if I'm telling you what you already know, but public servers in the NTP pool are monitored for their availability, then given a corresponding score up to 20. Only servers with a score above it, or above 10, are added to the pool. The score for my host's availability is a sawtooth pattern on the graph, which is attached. We put that in the show notes. Blue line is the actual score that he has, which suggests to him, first, his score increases to above 10 and his host is added to the pool. Second, traffic increases to the server. Third, some kind of limit is being reached on this host. 4, monitoring, host can't get responses, score goes back down under 10. His host is removed from pool and traffic drops off. And 5th, monitoring host can contact my host again, go to step 1. The fun part is this only happens in IPv4 traffic. The same host via IPv6 has a score of 20 almost perfectly for months now, also attached. Obviously, there is much less IPv6 traffic compared to IPv4, which is what makes me think if it's some kind of special kernel or similar limit as opposed to network CPU resource limitations. Do you have any suggestions where to be looking to debug this?
I would mostly think it would have to be a network or CPU resource limitation rather than some kind of kernel limitation. Not that familiar with running a public NTP server, but you'd want to look at your typical things like top, load average, network throughput, and try to figure out why it's having this problem.
Screwing up the scores, yeah. But it's interesting.
In particular, if the load level is getting to the point where the NTP server cannot keep up answering the requests, then that should be very noticeable, right? It should be, eating up all the CPU or whatever. I see that you've got this running in a VM, so I wonder how much, have you given it enough memory and enough CPU time to actually handle the load that you're putting on it?
Or the networking is through the VM layer might be putting some delays there or screwing up with the numbers that are being put out into the net. The interesting for me is that it only happens with IPv4 and IPv6 is stable, which makes me wonder what kind of specifics are there that might cause this. Well, that's an interesting challenge. Maybe one of our readers or listeners knows that, and we can cover this on a future show. If they have encountered that problem before, and they have a solution for that, we'll be happy to post this and connect you to so that you get an NTP server that's on IPv4 as stable as on IPv6. Other than that, I am not familiar with any other ideas we could try. But yeah, as I said, if you have someone that knows about this, then send us a link to feedback at bsdnow.tv, and we'll be happy to cover that in a future episode.
Yes, and that is the end of the show for this week. And we hope to see you at BSDCan next year.
Yeah,
if this didn't convince you, nothing will.
Then you can get excited as we are and say hi to us when we meet us there. And you pretty much can glean from this episode how cool the show and the actual conference and Dev Summit was. So you might want to join that in the future. So thanks for watching, and see you next week.
And cut. Hey, good God, how are we going to finish the second episode? It's already 4:30.
Do you have time for that, or should we do this at another time?
When else would we do it?
Well, tomorrow maybe? Or Friday?
Tomorrow.
I could also do it on another time than tomorrow evening for myself, because I have the full day free.
Tomorrow should be fine.
Mm-hmm.
We could do that.
Same time?
Yeah. Or a bit earlier, whichever works for you.
Yeah, we could also do 7, an hour earlier.
I don't know. What time do we normally start for you?
For me, it's 8.
That's fine with me, but if you want to start earlier, that's fine as well.
Yeah. So I don't take too much time off from your Thursday.
Yep. Well, I have to be done by 5 o'clock on Thursday.
So what's the time?
We're not going to take more than 2.5 hours tomorrow anyway, so.
Yeah, so we have a fixed deadline where we have to finish. And I guess we can do this if we skip to the clock. And we have a couple of material in there, but we can make sure.
Well, yes, the nice thing is we already have the show notes written, so it's not going to be that much work.
Yeah, we pretty much start right away.
And start right away, exactly.
Power through.
All right, so we need a cold open first.
For this one, I have a description. It's just a bit smart, but yeah. Yeah, I can do that. It's not too difficult anymore. Yep. This episode, we're going to cover our experiences and our cool stuff that's happening at BSD Now, also called BSD North. So everything that happened at the conference, the Dev Summit, the tutorials, anything the last week had in it. Uh, right, North. Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's too close to the real name. Okay, one more time. I don't have to talk that much anyway. This week on the show, we're going to cover everything that's been happening. One more time. Yeah. Simple past. Come on. This week on the show, we're going to tell you everything that's happened at BSDCan last week, which was an exciting conference. And we're also covering a little bit about a blog post on conference speaking, which is a good advice for people who have never done this before or not that often. And we are going to show you everything that you need to know, of course, about the latest things that happened in BSD now. Yep. Ta-da. Yeah, you need to get some rest and then you have a better voice. Well, it's not too bad actually, sounding for me. Mm. Yeah, but like today, I can cover the other parts or much more parts. Okay, yep, that's good. Full show, 2 hours, 5 hours, 3 hours. How long is this? Hmm. Okay, that's good, I guess. Cool. Then I'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, see you
At,
tomorrow and we'll try to finish everything.
yeah, an hour earlier, and then we'll power through because we have a fixed deadline that works. Chat room is already active or has been active for a while.